let's get started. I'm sure many of you have heard about Leiningen. Covering this, Leiningen is a build tool with simple aspirations. We haven't had any documented cases of hair getting set on fire, so I think it's been very successful in that regard so far. The project started about a year ago, had a release almost a couple weeks later. So it's very active, over 50 contributors, and 20,000 downloads since January when we moved to GitHub, where they count the downloads for us. So around July, when I measured, it was used by about 70% of the open source closure projects on GitHub. So yeah, and I know most of you are probably pretty familiar with this, but I'm just going to go through the basics of bread and butter of Leiningen, how it works. So let's see how this. Okay. So the line new command just spits out a new project for you to work with, kind of a skeleton for you to fill in the blanks. So there you go. It's got project.clj files where you configure your project with just all kinds of settings in there. We'll cover that, and then the source and the test files are there for you. Kind of standard layout. So you can do, you can pull up a REPL with that, and this is going to notice that there aren't any. Let me boost that up for you. This notices that, oh, this is a fresh project. It doesn't have anything in the lib directory, which is where all the dependencies are kept. It's going to go out and fetch that for you and launch a REPL. The REPL's got a socket server running, so you can background that and use Telnet to connect to it from various shells. Kind of nice to just keep that up there in the background, etc. You all know how that works. And then you run the test. The new test spits out a skeleton with a bunch of failing tests. So a little incentive to fill that in there. So, that's it for the demo. Nothing too exciting. This is what project.clj looks like. You see, you get the name and the version, and the dependencies are in there. There's two kinds of dependencies. There's the regular dependencies, so projects that depend on your project will pull in those dependencies. The dev dependencies are just meant for you to use while you're working on the project itself, so non-transitive. And then, so those dependencies, Leiningen's going to look on Maven Central, which is where you find a lot of your Java libraries. It's going to look on the Clojure build server, so you can pull in like the latest snapshot that was just built half an hour ago. And it's going to look on Clojars, which is a community Clojure repository, so I'll talk more about that later. But in a lot of projects, you're going to want to add your own repositories. You can slap that in there for your secret password-protected code. So Clojars is, like I said, a community repository for this kind of stuff. Clojars launched around the same time Leiningen did, and there's kind of a synergy going on there where Leiningen is a lot more useful because of Clojars, because you can, if you've got your library, you can push it up out there, other people can use it, they just copy-paste the little snippet it gives you in there into their project.clj and depend upon it. So using Leiningen with Clojars is pretty easy. You call the jar task and the POM task. POM spits out a POM.xml, which is like the Maven speak for describing your project. And then once you have an account in Clojars and you have your SSH pub key up there, SCP can put it up there, and as soon as that's done, it's available for other people to depend on it. So super handy and very low overhead, no no administrative getting a project approved or anything. So I think that's really important at this stage in Clojure. It's just allowed for an explosion of libraries to get out there and be useful. So, next I'll be covering some of the more advanced features, things maybe not everyone knows about. And I don't think most people know about this because it's new in 1.4, which is unreleased. It's like the next version should be out in maybe couple weeks, I hope. So the idea here is when you write your dev tests, you can touch metadata to them. And in this example, it assumes that we've got some dev tests with integration metadata. Integration set to true in the metadata. So the test selectors, there's a map of keywords to predicates. So the predicate can be any kind of function, keyword or FN, literal, or whatever. So the idea here is you use the metadata to kind of tag your functions, and then you can say, I want to run this subset of functions, not necessarily just everything in this namespace, but across all the namespaces, which functions have this metadata set to true. So we use that at work a lot for integration tests. Well, not yet. This was written to support that functionality because we needed a better way of segregating out our tests. So these kind of tests are really slow. We don't want to run them all the time, but they're still really important to run on like the continuous integration server. So this gives you an ad hoc way of just classifying your tests. Very useful. Also recently, although this is in 1.3, we have added the support for user plugins. So you noticed in the sample project CLJ, there's a dependency on swank closure. So everyone who uses Emacs wants that in there because it makes it a lot more useful. But not everyone on the project uses Emacs, so why should they have to pull in this dependency that they're not going to use? So now, if you just symlink that jar into your home.line plugins directory, then it's available across all your projects. So very useful. And the manual symlink thing is kind of hokey. That's going to go away in 1.4. It will be handled automatically. So another cool thing, check out dependencies. So this is great for when you're hacking two projects in parallel. You've got maybe you've got a project that depends on Ring and you want to add a feature to Ring. So normally you would have to go in and say like, okay, I've added this function into Ring. I'm going to go into Ring's project and do a line install. And I'm going to go back to my project. I'm going to do line deps. And I'm going to restart my swank server. And then the new function's going to be there. Oh, I got it slightly wrong. I'm going to have to go back and do that all again. Pain in the neck. So what you can do with Leiningen now, you can just create a checkouts directory in your project and symlink Ring into there. And then when Leiningen calculates your project's class path, it's going to include Ring's source directory and resources directory on there, so changes get picked up instantly. So that helps quite a bit for that, two projects in parallel situations. So this is kind of like multi-module builds, except it's totally ad hoc and opt-in. So you don't have to just declare up front like, this is the structure of my project, this depends on so in native multi-module builds, it's quite hierarchical, top-down. This is ad hoc opt-in. Some of the people on your team are going to be using Ring and hacking on it, some of the people aren't, so why should that complexity be added onto them?
Question.
Yes,
do you have
question.
to turn it off in project.clj, or is it this like ahead of project.clj settings that would bring you the same library?
This is, so the question was, how does this interact with declaring the dependency in project.clj? You still want to declare your dependency in project.clj if you're doing this, because it's opt-in. Like if you have this in your checkout of your project, your coworker's not going to have it. So if the dependency is not in project.clj, they're going to miss out on Ring entirely. So this is kind of overlaid on top of that. Good question. So another thing, this is a little more experimental. So if you've worked in Clojure and have a Unix background, you will have noticed that, I guess it's not just Clojure, but JVM languages in general are not terribly Unix friendly in terms of just command line interaction in general. Like the Java command line launcher, kind of feels like someone wrote it in 97 and totally hasn't touched it since. To put it generously. So this is an attempt to, so part of that is we can't do anything about. Java is slow to start up, the JVM is slow to start up, and that's just, we're going to have to wait for improvements from the hotspot team. Go hotspot team, love you guys. But some of it's cultural, and I think we can work around some of that. So now Leiningen will allow projects to specify that they come with shell wrappers, which means when you install them, they'll place they'll place your shell script in home.line /bin. And so you put that on your path, and then suddenly you've got swank closure available as a command line, as a command line executable. And you don't have to construct your Java -cp mouthful every time. So that's customizable. You can say, in your project.clj, you can say shell wrapper true, and it'll just give you the default shell wrapper. But if you want to add some more functionality to that, maybe support some more environment variables or something, then you can specify a bin that you want to be the shell wrapper, and you can specify your own main in there as well. So they use this format to just interpolate that into the bin. So I don't know how this is going to be used. It might just be that that doesn't go anywhere, but I think there's room for improvement with command line interaction and closure, and I hope this can accommodate it. So tasks take arguments, perform side effects, return values, so naturally they're represented as functions. This is kind of just a general pattern you see in closure. You ask yourself, okay, how should foo be represented? And the answer, 90% of the time is some variant of closure-lang ifun, functional language, function, everything kind of revolves around that. So being functions, you can leverage memoization, composability. Everyone knows how functions work. They're great. And we'll talk a little more about that. Another thing to note, some tasks run in the context of a project, most tasks, but there's some that run anywhere, like the new task, obviously that can't run inside a project. Help can run anywhere. So Leiningen can actually look at the arg lists of your defen and say, oh, this guy's expecting an argument named project, so this must expect to be run inside the context of a project, and it'll freak out if you try to do it anywhere else. So that's just a little taste of the way you can leverage just everything in a function. This is probably the trickiest thing about writing Leiningen plugins or tasks, is that it's really important to separate out, to enforce a process separation between your code and Leiningen's code. Between your project's code and Leiningen's code. So Leiningen's using Clojure 1.3 right now, and obviously most projects are not going to be jumping on that right away, so it's really important that that you have a separate process space for that, or class loader space for that. So Leiningen implements that with eval-in-project, which is a lot like eval, except it takes a project argument first, and then launches a subprocess that forks it off and performs the eval inside there. And apart from that, it works like eval. It's going to take a form. You can use backquote and unquote, and get all your stuff. Build up a formula like that. So it's a little tricky to remember anytime something runs in the context of your project. It's got to go through here, but it does provide serious benefits. So that's important. So tasks can be extended using this library called Robert Hooke. Robert Hooke. I name all my projects after literary characters. And Robert Hooke, while he was a historical character, is also a character in the Baroque cycle by Neil Stephenson. So I fudged a little bit there. So let me just step you through this here. Robert Hooke is a general mechanism for extending functions of any kind. What's going on here is we're creating two defens called spacing and embiggen, and they take a function as their first argument and an a string as their second argument. And so you got those two functions, and you're going to add them as hooks onto println. So that is done under the covers with some alter var root magic. It prepares the var to be hooked and conjures on these wrapper functions there and composes them. So when you actually call println, what it's doing is it's calling a chain that's composed of spacing, embiggen, and the original println. So it kind of steals some of the stuff from, if you're familiar with closure.test fixtures mechanism, it's very similar to that. But you see there, you call println, the output you get is, so that the string foobar is X, and it gets passed through in spacing, it gets the spaces interposed, and then in embiggen it gets uppercased, and then bam, it comes out as foobar. So, so you can do all kinds of things with Robert Hooke. A common thing to do is to set up your own bindings. Test selectors are implemented this way. So it rebinds internal closure.test thing, which is kind of icky, but used to great effect with the flexibility you get in test selectors. You can just decide not to continue. You can just never call F conditionally based on the arguments or an environment variable or whatever. You can modify the arguments as they go in. You can add your own side effects. You can return a different value. All kinds of stuff. So with Robert Hooke, you're taking control of the function and do your own things. So when you're using this with Leiningen, normally you apply hooks to tasks, although it's also common to apply hooks to eval-in-project as well if you need to kind of insert your own setup around everything that's going to be eval inside the project. So as an example, the Java-C task for compiling Java code in a mixed project used to be implemented as a plugin. It's now part of Leiningen, but when it was a plugin, you could write a hook to ensure that before you compiled, you did the AOT compilation of your closure code, the Java-C compilation ran first. So that's kind of a standard usage of the basic kind of add side effects, the fourth point there. But you can have any function. This is really general. It's not part of Leiningen. It's its own dependency, so you can pull it in without all this Leiningen stuff. But things can get pretty crazy if you do this much. So anytime you have a function that you control, you should not hook it. You should make the function more flexible and allow it to do what you want it to do. So this is for taking control of functions that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do anything with. So it's very important also to accept the same ranges of arguments as the original. This is actually something that the example I showed you was really terrible at. If you go here, you're applying a wrapper to println, but hey, genius, println doesn't take just a single R. Println doesn't even require that its argument is a string. So these are awful examples, in terms of in terms of what's decent to do. It's more of an example of what's possible. So generally, you want to be sure to take var args, and you want to apply F to your var args rather than just calling it like this, just for flexibility in case the function you're hooking changes arities in the future, or adds an additional arity or something. And final caveat: hooking multi-methods wraps the def multi in a function. So if you try to do a def method on top of that later, it's going to be like, that's not even a multi-method. What are you trying to do? So don't do that. I'll do it if you know you're never gonna have another method. But anyway, composability issues there. And this doesn't work with macros really. Well, it might be able to be made to work with macros, but I don't really like that idea. So probably not a good idea. So that's extending tasks. And so one of the things I try to do is make it very clear that there's no distinction between tasks inside Leiningen and tasks outside Leiningen. And if you want to add your own task, it's first class. It's basically indistinguishable. So if you still need to touch a built-in one, then you use Robert Hooke. Leiningen is the most contributed to closure project. Over 50 contributors. Here's a little rainbow of awesome commits coming in. So I'd like to talk a little bit about how that works, kind of why I think that's happened. Maybe some general principles there for you to use in your own projects. What can you do to make your project easy to contribute to? I think that's a really important goal to have in mind. So with Leiningen, the biggest thing that we've just started doing recently now is every time a new release comes out, we try to have these low-hanging fruit threads on the mailing list. So if there are lurkers on the mailing list, people who are wondering how does this project work? Maybe I could help out a little. It just kind of, you throw out a few bug fixes, things that anyone could just dive in and understand without, you want to have a roadmap with the big features, but you really want to make it explicit that, oh, these little things here are a great place to step in. So low-hanging fruit is a big thing. Then documentation. So it's important to have user-level documentation. That's if you don't have any users, you're never going to have people who get to the point of being contributors. But you want to go beyond that. This is actually something that Leiningen's not very good at right now. Leiningen only recently got more than 1,000 lines of code long. So I put off this for a while, and I kind of wish I had maintained a hacking guide as I went along. A lot of people get tripped up by eval-in-project, and just the general flow of the project, in Leiningen, how you resolve tasks, how the environment gets set up, things like that. So that's really important for people wanting to dive in. Then you really want to accept patches promptly. Your attitude you take towards patches really reflects how people think you care about contributors to your project. So this is something that I'm actually not very good at in some of my other projects, but I try, because I really care about Leiningen, I try to be really prompt with Leiningen. Maybe some of the other ones, swank closure, sorry guys. I love you, but I'm not as on the ball there. But people really, how you treat contributors really comes across as in that. And closely related to that is the idea of trusting people. So the Rubinius project is an experimental small stack style virtual machine for Ruby. And they have a policy that if you get a patch applied or accepted, if you submit a patch and it's accepted, then you can ask for commit rights and they'll just give them to you. So that's kind of, some people would call it crazy, but I've talked to Evan, the maintainer, and he said, I've not had problems with this. I've had to revert less than 10 commits in the whole 3 or 4 year life of this project. So the lesson there is if you trust people and treat them like responsible adults, they'll act like it in general. And sometimes people don't want commit rights, and that's fine too. I mean, that's just people being straightforward about, I don't think that would be a good idea. Don't trust me. But people tend to respect that if you show them that respect. So that's a big deal. Oh, one other thing that makes people want to contribute to project: stickers. If you've contributed to Leiningen, come talk to me. I have a sticker for you. If you've written a plugin, I think that counts too. If you'd like a sticker, then we can talk about low-hanging fruit. Yeah, loves me some stickers. So, I guess couldn't talk about the community without talking about plugins. So, I've talked about writing tasks and extending tasks. Plugins are either tasks or hooks that are separate projects that you can depend on as dependencies that bring in that kind of stuff. So here's just a little smattering of some of my favorites. Line multi is really cool. I like it a lot. The coolest thing about it is I just kind of asked about it on the mailing list. I said, hey, wouldn't it be great if this plugin existed? And then someone came along and like a week later was like, oh, here you go. Wow, cool. So, so what it does is it so in your project.clj, you have your list of dependencies. Line multi lets you define parallel sets of dependencies. So say you want to make sure your project works with Clojure 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3. That'd be kind of a pain in the neck, but this lets you say, okay, I have this set of dependencies. So say your project depends on another project that has different versions, like they have a backwards compatibility version for Clojure 1.1 and a stable version for Clojure 1.2 and a snapshot version for Clojure 1.3. And this line multi plugin lets you bundle all those together and name that. This is like my 1.3 set, my 1.2 set, my 1.1 set. And you just say multi-test and it'll run the tests over all of those at once. So very handy, especially now that we're getting to the point where there's more and more Clojure versions in the wild. pretty nice. Line diff test is also quite handy. So the idea is you've got your closure.test test that maybe you're doing a is equal on a seek, and it's got like 10 things in it, and you're expecting 10 things and you got 11, and you're looking through there to try to figure out which part is different. So this actually puts the output in like a diff, much easier to read. So it's hard to explain, so I'll just show you there. You can see the the plus minus there, what's different in the actual versus the expected. So very nice to have. Like Radagast is something that we cooked up at the Seattle closure meeting. Seizure. What Radagast does is you give it a namespace to instrument, and it goes through and does some alter var root magic on it to kind of flip a bit when it gets called. And then, so it instruments the namespaces you want to instrument, and then it runs the tests, and it's able to tell you, oh, these functions didn't get called during the test run. So that's great for test coverage. It's also good for kind of shaking out, say you've got a namespace where you've accumulated some cruft, you're not sure if all the functions are still needed anymore, you can instrument it and just go bam. So handy. Hasn't seen a lot of use. It's pretty primitive, but it's amazing what you can do in 25 lines with alter var root and some metadata. Kind of really hit home the value of metadata for me. Leiningen war is you're doing web apps, you want to deploy a .war file. It's great for just bundling that up and making easy deployment to the Java web servers. And there's more on the wiki. So lots of different options there. Hadoop, Conjure, all kinds of stuff. So talk a little bit about what's next for Leiningen. I talked about the 1.4 release. That's coming up. Big thing there is test selectors and plugin consolidation. So there's been quite a few. Because tasks from plugins are first class, I'm able to just tell people, if you've got this idea, let's let it evolve in a plugin first and let it mature, and then scoop it up once it's stabilized. So we're doing that with the JavaC task, search task, run task. There's another one in there. So that'll be great, just kind of expanding the core. What else? Okay, so Maven just had a release of Maven 3, and Leiningen's based on Maven in kind of a roundabout way. It uses, there's a library called Maven Antasks that kind of exposes the minimal API needed for useful dependency interaction. Leiningen uses that. It's a little hairy to go through all these layers. So in Maven 3, they spun out the repository handling into its own library. So Maven the good parts there. Another thing we're going to be thinking a lot more about is an explicit public API. And this is something you really want to think about before you think you need it, because by the time you realize you need it, it's too late. We've had a few issues with plugins breaking because there's just been there hasn't been a really clear delineation between a public API and what's okay with what's in internal implementation details. So that's something we could do better about. And so I use Swank closure, obviously, and I run all my tests in there. I realize not everyone does this, so thinking about supporting Nailgun for quick test runs for those non-Emacs users. Using jars straight out of the M2 directory rather than copying them into lib would be a little cleaner. The way it's done right now is kind of for historical reasons that don't really apply anymore. Last one is pretty cool. So Hudson is a continuous integration server. Very nice to have, use it at work. So this company called CloudBees is starting to offer Hudson as a service where you get your build done for like 1 cent a minute, just on demand. And I've been talking with them about installing Leiningen on their servers. So a lot of people ask me like, oh, what do I do for dependencies that I can't put on clojars because they're private? So this, getting yourself set up with an account here and pushing it out to a private S3 location will make that a lot easier. Just real low overhead, everything's handled for you. So expect an announcement on the mailing list soon. That's about it. So I've got, the Wi-Fi's been a little spotty, so I've got Leiningen being served on a local LAN connection, so you don't have to try to reach out there. So yeah, if you're interested, just pull it up. The canonical home of Leiningen is on GitHub there. Technomancer.us is my blog, and then my slides are there as well. So I'll be taking questions, I suppose. Yes?